The clock on the dashboard flickered to 11 p.m. Outside, the street was a tomb of shadows and frost. Then, the movement began. From the mouth of the alley, it emerged. A dog, moving with a singular rhythmic purpose. It crossed the pavement and stopped at the base of the rusted dumpster. Every night, the same spot. Every night, the same hour. Arthur watched from his idling car, his breath fogging the glass. He had left a bowl of scraps near the metal bin hours ago. The scent of meat hung in the stagnant air, yet the animal did not even glance at it. It did not sniff the ground. It did not search for a way to fill its belly. It simply sat. It planted its paws on the frozen asphalt and turned its head toward the empty street. The silence of the night deepened around it. The dog did not pace. It did not whine. It held its position with the rigidity of a statue. This was not a stray looking for a handout. It was a sentry guarding a post that no longer existed. The repetition was hypnotic. Arthur leaned closer to the windshield. The streetlights flickered, casting long, jagged shadows across the alleyway. He watched the dog for any sign of the usual stray behavior. There was none. No frantic sniffing of the pavement. No desperate scavenging near the trash. The animal simply held its ground, a dark shape against the gray concrete. The wind picked up, swirling snow into the alley, yet the dog did not tuck its tail or hunch its shoulders. It did not shiver. Arthur pressed his palm against the cold glass, trying to catch a tremor, a twitch, anything that would betray the biting chill. The dog remained perfectly, unnervingly still. It was as if the cold did not exist for it. Arthur checked his watch again. This dog possessed a strange, quiet endurance that defied the basic laws of survival. It did not look for food. It did not look for warmth. It looked only at the empty mouth of the street, its head tilted slightly, as if listening for a footstep that never came. The pattern took root in Arthur's life with the precision of a clockwork mechanism. Night after night, the engine of his car cut out at the same intersection. He stopped tracking the hours by his watch and started tracking them by the dog's silhouette against the dumpster. It was a hypnotic rhythm that bled into his days. He found himself distracted at work, his mind drifting back to the alley, to the stillness, to the way the animal anchored the entire street in a state of perpetual expectation. He tried to skip a night, driving straight home, but the silence of his own apartment felt hollow compared to the heavy, charged air of that alleyway. By the seventh day, the detour was no longer a choice, it was a reflex. He pulled into his usual spot, the tires crunching on the frozen slush. The dog was there, as it always was, a fixed point in a shifting world. Arthur watched the steam rise from his own breath, his gaze locked onto the animal. Every night, the dog sat. Every night, Arthur watched. The boundary between observer and participant began to thin, pulled tight by the dog's devotion. The 10th night arrived with a biting wind that rattled the car frame. Arthur sat in the driver's seat, his hands gripping the wheel until his knuckles turned white. The dog was there, a dark, motionless statue against the rusted metal of the dumpster. The silence in the alley felt heavy, pressing against the glass. Arthur watched the animal, waiting for the usual rhythm to take hold. But tonight the air felt different. It was brittle, ready to snap. He looked at the dashboard clock. 11 p.m. The exact moment the vigil began. He felt a sudden, sharp impulse to end the distance between them. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic rhythm that contrasted with the stillness outside. He reached for the door handle. It felt cold, metallic, and impossibly heavy. He hesitated, his breath hitching in his chest, wondering if the moment he stepped out, the spell would break. He pushed. The door groaned, the hinges protesting in the quiet. He stepped out, his boots crunching on the frozen ground. The sound seemed deafening in the narrow space. He walked forward, his eyes locked on the animal. The dog did not flinch. It did not retreat. Arthur stopped 3 feet away, the cold air stinging his face, and finally broke the silence. "Why are you here?" he whispered. The question hung in the freezing air, unanswered. Arthur held his breath, expecting the animal to bolt, to growl, or to scramble into the shadows of the alley. Instead, the dog moved with a slow, deliberate grace. It turned its head. The motion was fluid, almost human in its measured pace. Arthur braced himself for the usual signs of a stray: the darting, panicked eyes of a scavenger, or the dull, glazed look of an animal broken by the winter. He found neither. The dog held his gaze with an unnerving, absolute stillness. Its eyes were clear, reflecting the dim street lamp overhead, but beneath the surface lay something that made Arthur's pulse stutter. There was no hunger there, no fear, no desperation for a scrap of meat or a warm corner. The gaze was heavy, anchored by a steady, burning hope that seemed to defy the rot of the alley and the biting cold of the night. It was an expression of profound, patient expectation. Arthur felt the air leave his lungs. He had spent weeks watching this animal from the safety of his car, but this look shattered that assumption. The dog was not waiting for a meal, it was waiting for a promise. The intensity of that stare pinned Arthur to the spot. The weight of that gaze lingered long after Arthur retreated to his car. He could not shake the feeling of being measured, of being weighed against a standard he did not yet understand. The next night, he returned. He brought a thick, heavy blanket, feeling the rough wool against his palms as he stepped out of the vehicle. The dog was waiting in the exact same spot, a silhouette against the brickwork. It did not move as Arthur approached. He knelt, extending the fabric toward the animal, hoping to offer a moment of warmth against the biting chill. The dog watched the motion, its ears twitching at the sound of the wool sliding against the pavement. It did not take the offering. Instead, the animal stood up. It looked back at Arthur, then turned its body toward the mouth of the alley. It took one step, paused, and looked back again. Arthur stood, his heart hammering against his ribs, and took the first step into the shadows to follow. The dog moved with a purpose that cut through the gloom of the back streets. Arthur kept his distance, his boots crunching against broken glass and loose gravel. Every few yards, the animal stopped at a corner, its silhouette motionless against the gray brick. It waited until Arthur rounded the bend before moving forward again. The rhythm was hypnotic. They passed rows of rusted dumpsters and heavy iron gates that groaned in the wind. At one point, a stack of discarded wooden crates blocked the path. Arthur had to scramble over them, his hands scraping against rough, splintered edges, while the dog stood on the other side, watching with intense focus. It did not bark, nor did it growl. It simply waited for him to regain his footing. The air grew colder as they pushed deeper into the industrial district. The streetlights here were dead, leaving only the pale, flickering glow of the distant city to guide them. The dog checked its pace, adjusting its stride to match Arthur's labored breathing. It was a silent, synchronized march through a landscape of neglect. Arthur followed, his eyes locked on the rhythmic sway of the dog, moving further away from the familiar streets into the heart of the quiet, forgotten city. The urban sprawl finally gave way to a graveyard of industry. The buildings here were husks, their skeletons exposed to the freezing night air. Arthur slowed his pace, his boots sinking into a thick layer of ash and debris that carpeted the ground. The dog surged ahead, its movements becoming frantic, almost desperate. It rounded a jagged corner and stopped dead. Before them stood a structure that seemed to have been forgotten by time itself. The paint had long since surrendered, peeling away in long gray strips. Every window was a jagged, empty socket staring out into the darkness. The structure groaned under the pressure of the wind, a low, metallic shriek. Arthur stood 10 paces back, his chest rising and falling in the biting cold. He watched as the dog approached the threshold. The animal did not hesitate, yet it did not enter. It sat down firmly on the cracked concrete of the entrance, its spine rigid. Then, the dog let out a low, haunting whine. It stared into the black maw of the building, waiting for a response that the wind refused to provide. The dog remained motionless, a dark anchor against the rotting wood of the entrance. Arthur stepped closer, his boots crunching on debris. He reached out, his fingers brushing the edge of the door. It was heavy, swollen with moisture and warped by the freezing temperatures. He applied pressure. The wood groaned, a sharp, splintering sound that echoed deep into the hollow structure. He braced his shoulder against the frame and shoved. The door gave way with a slow, grinding protest, swinging inward on rusted hinges. Arthur stepped into the void. He clicked his flashlight on. The beam sliced through the darkness, instantly illuminating a thick, swirling cloud of dust motes. They hung in the air like suspended ghosts, disturbed by his arrival. He swept the light across the room, catching the jagged edges of shattered window panes. The air inside was stagnant, tasting of damp earth. He took another step, his heartbeat loud. The dog followed, its claws clicking softly against the floorboards. Arthur held the beam steady, his gaze searching the shadows for whatever had brought them to this forgotten place. Arthur moved deeper into the room, his flashlight beam trembling slightly as it swept over the wreckage. The floor beneath him was a treacherous landscape of warped timber and jagged debris. He took a cautious step forward, but his boot caught on a protruding nail, sending a sharp metallic screech through the stagnant air. He stumbled, his hand shooting out to catch the edge of a rotting desk to regain his balance. The wood felt soft, crumbling under his grip like wet cardboard. He breathed out, the sound harsh in the stillness, and forced his focus back to the ground. He adjusted his grip on the light, angling the beam downward to avoid further hazards. As he navigated the final stretch of the floorboards, the light hit something that did not belong among the dust and rot. It was a small, rectangular object resting in the center of the room. He knelt, his knees hitting the cold, hard surface of the floor with a dull thud. He held the light steady, the beam locking onto the object. It was a photograph, lying face up against the grime. Arthur leaned closer, his breath hitching as the flashlight beam stabilized on the small, rectangular object. A thick layer of gray dust obscured the surface. He reached out, his thumb dragging slowly across the paper, clearing a path through the grime. The image beneath began to sharpen. It was a man, his face caught in a wide, genuine smile, his arm draped firmly over the back of a dog. The animal in the picture was identical to the one standing in the shadows behind Arthur. The dog's ears were perked in the photo, its posture alert and full of life. Arthur compared the two images, the vibrant, captured memory on the paper and the silent, waiting creature in the room. The crack in the frame cut through the man's shoulder, a jagged line that seemed to deepen the sense of absence. Arthur felt the weight of the discovery settle in his chest. This was not just a random find, it was the origin of the vigil. He looked back at the dog, then down at the man's face again. The connection was undeniable. Arthur shifted his weight, the floorboards groaning under him. He held the photograph in one hand, the flashlight in the other, and watched the dog. The animal did not look at the picture. It did not look at Arthur. Its gaze remained fixed on the threshold, directed toward the empty street outside. Arthur stood up slowly, his joints stiff from the cold. He moved to the doorway, tracking the dog's line of sight. There was nothing there but the skeletal frame of the building and the encroaching dark. He realized then that the dog was not searching for food or shelter. It was operating on a loop, a cycle of expectation that had lasted years. Every night at the same hour, the dog returned to this specific coordinate, expecting the man from the photograph to walk through that door. The dog's stillness was not exhaustion, it was a tactical, unwavering guard. Arthur looked at the man in the photo, then at the empty space where the man should have been. The realization hardened. The man had lived here, he had left, and he had never come back. The dog was not waiting for a meal, it was waiting for a ghost. The silence in the room felt heavy, punctuated only by the faint, rhythmic sound of the dog's breathing. The dog remained anchored to the threshold, its body a taut line of muscle. It did not blink. Its focus was absolute, directed entirely at the void beyond the doorway. Arthur watched from the center of the room, his own breathing shallow to avoid disturbing the silence. Outside, the wind picked up, whistling through the gaps in the rotted wood. A sharp gust slammed against the side of the building, causing a loose shutter to bang rhythmically against the frame. At the sound, the dog's ears snapped forward. It shifted its weight, muscles coiling as if preparing to bolt toward the entrance. It let out a low, vibrating sound in its throat, a mix of anticipation and warning. The shutter banged again. The dog leaned forward, nose twitching, testing the air for a familiar scent. The wind died down, leaving only the hollow groan of the structure. The dog's posture did not collapse. It simply settled back into its rigid, waiting stance, ears still angled toward the dark. It ignored the cold creeping across the floorboards. It ignored Arthur. The dog was listening to the wind. Arthur moved slowly, his knees hitting the floorboards with a dull, hollow thud. He did not want to break the silence. He knelt in the center of the room, the dust swirling in the beam of his light. The dog remained perfectly still, a silhouette carved out of the shadows. Arthur reached out, his hand hovering just inches from the animal's back, but he pulled back. The dog was not just waiting, it was existing in a state of suspended time. The room felt smaller, the walls pressing in with the weight of years. Every crack in the plaster and every layer of peeling paint seemed to hold the memory of the man who had left. Arthur looked at the dog's paws, worn and calloused from years of pacing the same path. There was no movement, no shift in weight. The silence was absolute. It amplified the sound of the wind outside, turning every gust into a mocking reminder of the empty doorway. The dog was not waiting for a visitor. It was holding a vigil for a ghost, trapped in a loop of loyalty. The room was a tomb. Arthur leaned closer, the floorboards groaning under his weight. He looked at the dog, then back at the photograph lying in the dust. The man in the picture was gone, yet the animal remained, tethered to a memory that refused to fade. Arthur reached out, his fingers brushing the coarse, matted fur along the dog's spine. The animal did not flinch, but its muscles tightened under his touch. "He is not coming back, is he?" Arthur whispered. The words hung in the stagnant air, stripped of comfort. The dog turned its head, eyes meeting Arthur's for the first time. There was no confusion in that gaze, only a profound, ancient exhaustion. The dog let out a long, shuddering breath that rattled in its chest, a sound that seemed to carry the weight of every day spent waiting. It did not break its stare. It did not stand up to leave. Instead, it leaned its weight against Arthur's hand, a silent, heavy acknowledgement of the truth. The dog knew. It had always known, yet it remained anchored to the threshold, its body refusing to abandon the only place where the man had once existed. Arthur watched the dog shiver, a faint tremor running through its thin frame. The cold in the room was absolute, biting through his own layers, yet the animal did not move to find warmth. It remained fixed, a statue of devotion in the center of the decay. Arthur looked at the dog's paws, cracked and dry, and then at the empty doorway where the wind whistled through the gaps. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. The dog was not just waiting for a ghost, it was slowly fading away, tethered to a memory that provided no heat. Arthur stood up, his joints stiff from the damp floor. He moved behind the animal, his hands trembling slightly as he reached for the heavy collar of his own coat. He pulled it off, the sudden rush of cold air biting at his skin, but he did not hesitate. He draped the thick fabric over the dog's back, tucking the edges beneath its sides. The dog let out a low, soft sound, its head drooping as the warmth settled in. The dog did not pull away. It remained still, the heavy wool of the coat muffling the sound of its breathing. The room seemed to shrink, the vast, cold space narrowing down to the small circle of warmth between them. Arthur kept his hand firm on the dog's shoulder, feeling the tension slowly drain from the animal's frame. For the first time in weeks, the dog turned its head away from the doorway. It looked at Arthur. The intensity in its eyes shifted, the burning hope replaced by a quiet, heavy recognition. It let out a long, slow exhale, the sound vibrating against the floorboards. Arthur did not move. The dog shifted its weight, sliding closer until its side pressed against his leg. It was a simple, physical anchor. The wind continued to howl through the shattered window frames, but the sound no longer felt like a summons. The world outside these walls moves at a frantic, indifferent pace. It is easy to look at the noise and the distance between people, and conclude that loyalty is a relic of a different time. Yet, the scene in this derelict room proves otherwise. It stands as a stubborn, quiet contradiction to the idea that everything is disposable. when you see a creature refuse to abandon its post, even when the person it waits for has long since vanished, you are seeing the raw, unvarnished truth of devotion. This is not a story about a dog in an alleyway. It is a reminder that the capacity for unwavering commitment still exists, hidden in the corners of a cynical world. If this account of Arthur and his companion has reached you, do not let it stop here. Pass it on to someone who needs to be reminded that such bonds are real. In a landscape that often feels hollow, sharing this truth acts as a vital anchor. It confirms that even when everything else fades, the act of staying, the act of caring, and the act of remembering remain the most powerful forces we possess. Loyalty is not a ghost. It is a choice, made every single day. Stories like this do not end when the screen goes dark. They linger, pulling at the threads of our own memories. We all have moments where we have witnessed that kind of fierce, quiet dedication in the animals that share our lives. Think back to the creatures you have known. Have you ever stood witness to an animal that refused to give up on someone, even when the world had moved on? Did you see that same steady, burning hope in their eyes? I want to know about those bonds. Tell me in the comments. Have you ever known an animal that refused to give up on someone? Your stories are the proof that this kind of loyalty is not just a memory, but a living, breathing part of our world. Thank you for listening to this journey. Keep those stories alive.